It's just lumps up.
Yeah, I know, and then there are some days, like on my first week of the month, I get this. No, Barbara.
Would it be light?
No, it's better without the light.
No?
No, I think.
Yeah,
It's
you
still
do.
working
You
hard.
do our best. You get to
Lights
see
on,
the-
sorry.
see the screen better.
Did you call me?
No.
And even-
Don't fall
I thought
asleep.
you said Barbara.
The dark glasses make it even darker.
Yeah, take.
Oh, no, they turn dark because of the,
Sun.
you're right.
That's that big thing up in the sky.
That's an airplane.
Actually, it's not the sky, it's space.
Hey, there it goes. It worked.
What's the name of that island we went to that had that?
Okay, Dottie's coming, but we're gonna go ahead and get started. All right, so we're gonna talk.
Oh.
We're gonna talk about a lot of different research here on the power of thoughts. We're going to speak on, in the beginning, kind of just a little bit of warm up, a lot of basic research, and then we're gonna get into some stuff that's pretty mind bending and pretty insane. There's a whole new field of consciousness studies. Whole journals are coming out about it and things like that. So kind of intertwines with quantum physics and all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's going to be fun to learn about. All right. So we're going to talk about the impact of gratitude, how gratitude can change different parts of your life. All right. So one study found that grateful people who just describe themselves as grateful, that was how this study did it, experienced fewer aches and pains and reported feeling healthier than other people. So, being grateful can help you feel better just in your body, right? Additionally, writing in a gratitude journal has been found to improve sleep. Okay, that was in a study in applied psychology. Another study found that took a bunch of people who didn't know each other and kind of set them up, for just introductory networking kind of event. And the people who were told to express gratitude or thankfulness that they met those new people were more likely to continue that new friendship and relationship. So, and lastly, a study in Journal of Applied Sports Psychology found that gratitude improved sport performance. So job performance, it kind of falls in there. All right. So we're also going to talk about the impact of positivity. So not just gratitude, right? We started with gratitude because it's, Thanksgiving, thankful month here, but we're going to talk about just the power of positivity and having positive thoughts. Okay? So, a very interesting study found that people who reported themselves as being in the most optimistic category actually had improved immune systems, right? So their cellular functioning for their immune system was better than the people who reported themselves as less optimistic. Also, there was a study, and this is really interesting, done on 70,000 nurses. Okay, this was done by Harvard, and it was taken over 20-year span. All right, and they found that they categorized the nurses into 4 different categories of optimism. So the most optimistic were level 4, the least optimistic were level 1. So over a 20-year span with these 70,000 nurses, all right, so this is a big study, a lot of people. From level 4, the most optimistic, to the least optimistic, there was a 38% reduction in heart disease. Controlling for all other factors, they controlled for people who had chronic diseases beforehand, all those types of things. So this was with everything else controlled for, a 38% reduction in heart disease, and it was a 29% reduction in mortality, in death. So if you were in the highest category of optimism, you were 29% more likely to be alive than the other group. All right? Another study done, this one's a little bit less, this was done with just 999, so almost 1,000 people from Holland, all right? So a lot more of a homogeneous kind of population, so a lot different than the 70,000 nurses. They found that there was they had the same setup, right? So 4 different categories. There was a 77% reduction in mortality for those people. So that was, I mean, that's a lot more telling. Maybe something different about their culture and positivity and things like that. But still, same numbers in the sense that the more positive you are, the longer you're going to live, basically. And the researchers who did that study, the study on the 70,000 nurses, they wanted to call for a long-term study done on optimism increasing strategies and mortality. So the only thing I would have a problem with if I'm in the group that doesn't get the optimism increasing strategies, right?
Right.
That's not fair to me, right? I'm going to die earlier because you want to do some research? But just funny. Just not funny, but interesting. Okay, so placebo effect, we've probably heard about it, but just want to go and talk about some of the very, very, very interesting studies and how powerful and how real it actually is. Okay? So one of the kind of classical placebo effect, one of the first placebo effect studies was done with a sugar pill, the same sugar pill, given to both groups, and one group was told it was a stimulant. I was supposed to say stimulant, that's an error. And one group was told that it was a sedative, right? So in the sedative group, 66% of them said they felt drowsy. They had a sugar pill. In the stimulant group, 90% of them said they felt increased energy. 90%, right? So same exact pill, and both groups were that affected by it, right? So when this study was done, there was no medical imaging done or anything like that. This was just reported. So for a long time, people felt and thought that the placebo effect was still just all in your mind, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about antidepressants. So first thing, for a drug to go to market, it only has to outperform a placebo in one clinical trial. So the study that I was reading said that there was an actual antidepressant that went to market, and it did 8 clinical trials, and 7 times the placebo outperformed it, and it's still on the market. Just so everybody knows. This is a study done by the American Psychological Association. They found that 82% of effectiveness of antidepressants is from placebo, from the effect itself. More than half of the studies on the 6 leading antidepressants found that placebos were more effective. And antidepressants are one of the most common drugs prescribed in our society.
The magic of the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
So which drug was it? The one you can, no.
Yeah. So surgical placebo, again, this is a pretty interesting one. So in the New England Journal of Medicine, they took patients that had knee arthritis, right? Osteoarthritis of the knee, okay? And they performed a real surgery where they cleaned out the knee, and then they performed a fake surgery where they just gave them a little slit and they had scars, all right? 2 years later, they monitored them for two years. 2 years later, there was absolutely no difference in the pain decrease by all of the participants. So the participants in both felt a significant decrease and went back to normal habits of daily life, even though the other group didn't even have a surgery. So again, it's not just a placebo effect. There's something that your body is doing when it thinks that it's healed. It is changing the body. It's changing its own reality just by thinking that, right?
What was the population? I mean,
The population of the
what's
knee
the
surgery
amount?
one? I think that was around 60. I'm not sure. I have the studies. Yeah, I think it was about 60 people.
individuals?
So 2 groups of 30.
30
Yeah.
and 30, okay.
I think that one was. I have the studies. I can give them to anybody. Anybody who wants any of this research, I have all of it. So recently, the placebo effect has been studied more and more and more, and now we're doing it with PET scans and MRI scans so we can see what's happening in the body. Okay, so subjects given placebos versus antidepressants were actually seen to have measurable releases of chemicals in the prefrontal cortex that reduced anxiety and depression. So this was from the placebo, not even from the antidepressant. So just by you thinking that something is working, you're literally changing your chemical output, right? So those thoughts change the things that become reality in your body, right? So just the connection between, everybody says the connection between mind and body, but more like your mind is not an abstract thing. You are there and you're thinking, right? So use those thoughts, use them, right?
But that's just for antidepressants.
No, no, it's
It's
true
for
for
and
everything.
and surgical?
And injections.
What about blood pressure medicines? Or,
I didn't do any on blood pressure, but I will do another one here that I'll describe. So, there was a report published in the Journal of Neuroscience where they took, there was a certain type of, I don't know, chemical that they shot into people's jaws and it made them have jaw soreness. You know, that was the first thing that they did. Then they took actual pain medicine and gave it to some people, and they took saline solution and gave it to some people. And when they did that, the brain reacted in the exact same way. The brain gave off the same pain-releasing endorphins that the chemical solution was supposed to do with the saline solution, and their pain was gone. So again, just because they had the shot, they thought this is definitely going to work. The brain thinks that, it releases it. So this whole time, were the shots ever actually working? Were the pills ever actually working, or was it always the brain that was working? That's the next step, is how does this tear down current science, right? That's the thing that scares you the most. Okay? So I didn't find anything on blood pressure medicine, but pain medicine and antidepressants, they both have studies on for sure.
I know there are studies on changing the color of a pill, like a new generation blood pressure medication, plus the power of the placebo effect of the caregiver saying, oh, this one's going to help you a lot more than your old one. It probably costs $100 a piece,
Yep.
but it's going to help you a lot more, and in fact, the same kind of
works.
placebo effect works.
Yeah.
By the way, even if placebos, even if the patients are told, this is a placebo, it's explained.
That's
right.
what.
And
that-
I will tell you,
Yep.
as someone that just retired from practice, I use placebos in my practice, the honest ones. I did very well with them.
Yeah.
People who, yeah, and patients were very, very much interested in, it wasn't every patient,
Yeah.
but certain selected patients
Yeah.
really appreciated the opportunity to use a placebo
Yeah.
and did well.
So honest placebo, that's what she's talking about. An honest placebo, either trial or whatever, is where they give you the placebo, they say, this is a sugar pill, and it's still going to help you. And the people take it and it helps them. Even knowing it's a placebo.
I'd say 80% effectiveness.
Yeah.
With disclosed placebos. And I've had many patients request, you know, after I discuss the same lecture with them, give me a placebo, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do very well with it.
Yeah.
The power of positive thinking.
No,
Yeah.
really, you're right.
Absolutely.
And remember, cancer drugs cannot go on the market without placebo control, including those things. The
Yeah.
lady who asked about blood pressure, very interesting question. I'm gonna look at that myself. I don't know the answer.
Epigenetics, okay? So epigenetics is an emerging field, okay, that is very, very interesting. So it's the study of heritable changes in gene expressions that do not involve changes to the underlying DNA sequences, right? So you have the sequence that's made up of, you know, all these different codes, and the code is what expresses with your physical manifestation, right? So if you have red hair or whatever, you have a code that expresses that, okay? So what happens in epigenetics is the code doesn't get changed, but the expression is changed, okay?
No.
So like people's eyes will change color.
They will?
Oh yeah, my eyes have changed color. My eyes were
Because
deep
you-
brown, and since I've been with Oliver, they've turned greener and greener. They're almost
Since
identical
you've
to
been
his now.
what?
Huh?
Since what?
Since I've been with my son. They've turned closer to his shades of green.
Did you want?
I didn't think about it at all. I mean, some things you aren't necessarily thinking about, and the changes can still happen with epigenetics. But the point is that, in general, regardless of what your DNA sequence is, things can change that DNA sequence, and beginning to find out that actually thoughts can change the expression of those DNAs.
So if I want blue eyes,
You
just
think
keep
about it.
thinking about it?
It's worth a try at this point.
Gotta really want them. It's Who cares?
So, one of the interesting studies that they have done has to do with cell growth. Okay, so your cells, depending on what type of cell they are constantly dying off and then regrowing, right? So it's usually about a 3-month turnaround, 2 to 3 month turnaround, depending on what type of cell they are. Okay, and those cells, they have different receptors, that's the word I'm looking for, receptors for all the neurotransmitters, okay? Neurotransmitters are different chemicals that express the things that are going on in your electrical brain, right? So every time that you have a certain thought, right, if you have a certain thought about happiness, there's an electrical pattern in your brain, okay? And that also associates to a certain chemical that's released to all your cells, all right? So, and that's how it is with everything. So when you're mad, you have a different chemical release because you have a different electrical pattern. When you're sad, different, okay, every single time. What they found with cell regeneration is that these receptors, they change based on your thoughts, right? So if you've been happier the last 6 months, you're going to have more receptors in the next level, the next generation of cells that take in happiness, and less receptors that take in sadness. So you're actually protecting yourself from whatever you had, right? But it works the same way with being sad or being upset. So in people who are depressive and things like that, it gets worse, right? So if you've been sad the last 6 months, your cells are now more accepting of being sad. So again, literally what you're thinking is creating new cells that are going to be more adapted towards that. Right? So you're able to actually physically change the world, right? Those cells are what interact with the entire world. Your thoughts start it, and your cells go through the world change because of those thoughts. So pretty interesting that we can, again, you have more control than you think you have to produce things that are great for yourself, right? Rat fear, okay? So we got, this is, I thought the mouse was a little cuter than a rat, so I went with that. So what they did with the rats, all right, they took this, it was like a sweet smelling aroma, okay, that doesn't have any type of actual harm to it, and kind of smelled like a flowering tree, I guess, and every time they would introduce this aroma, to the rats, all right, they would inject, or they would give them a slight shock, okay, it didn't kill the rats or anything like that, whatever. So the next generation of rats that came from those rats, all right, they now, as soon as they smelled it, would automatically release chemicals into their body of fear, right? So when they would get the shock, they would release the stress hormones. And so their next generation now, even without getting the shock, were releasing those chemicals, okay? So, again, the thoughts of the parents are now changing the reality and the future of their offspring, even when the offspring have no association with that, right? Pretty crazy powerful, right? So whatever you were scared of, your children may automatically be scared of without ever having any actual experience to be scared of that. Okay? So they begin, they do this research on rats, and now they start looking at humans and generational studies. So these are very interesting. Again, they're just kind of starting here, but they are very interesting. So one that was done on prisoners of war from the Civil War, so kind of far back, okay? But they went and looked at the prisoners of war that were from the North and in the South. They were in extreme conditions. Many of them died. I think it was up to like 80% of them died when they were prisoners of war down in the South. And died from dysentery and lack of food, just horrible deaths, things like that. So they looked at the descendants of all these prisoners of war, and they found that the children who were descendants of these prisoners of war had much higher mortality rates than other children, right? So, and they did a lot of this research to make sure that it didn't have anything to do with the prisoners of war taking it out on their children or anything like that, right? So what they did is they looked at children from these prisoners of war. They looked at the children they had before the war, because some of these prisoners of war had children before the war and after the war. the children before the war didn't have a decline in their mortality rate, but the children after the war did. Right? So that's, that.
Has there been any gene studies on more recent
Yes.
victims? You know,
Yes.
now?
So the other one that they have looked into, that's the next one I was going to get to talk about. And they did this, a similar comparison to the prisoners of, or the non-prisoners of war, right, and their kids, and they have a higher mortality rate than the prisoners of war did, right. So they have also started in 2013. An Israeli psychologist did one on the Holocaust and prisoners of war from the Holocaust. Now, again, the amount of data was not very much. Okay, I think there was only 32 Holocaust victims that they were able to research, and then their children off that, so maybe a total of 90 or so. And so the amount is not very much, and that's what is criticized right now is, you know, hey, we can't, this is a very small sample size, but found the same thing, that the mortality rate and what they actually found in the, even in the grandchildren of the Holocaust survivors, they found that their release of cortisol was more, was increased to stress than the average person. So their hypothesis is that because their family members went through such a harrowing ordeal that it tried to pass down the ability to release this stress hormone quicker and be able to get through possible, you know, catastrophe type things more than normal people. So just kind of interesting, kind of crazy to think about that. Again, the impact on one generation can have kind of reverberating effects all the way down the line. Okay? Yeah?
Any studies on the effect of humor or laughter?
No, I didn't find any. I'm not saying there aren't, but
I had twin brothers. They got separated in the Navy, and when one got injured, the other one felt it.
oh yeah.
One fell and broke his hip. The
Yeah.
other one started limping on that same night.
Yeah, that's.
Identical.
I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff about twins. I could probably do a whole thing on twin research.
Yeah, I love that.
We might have to do one of those sometime. Okay, so everything so far has actually been very, very benign compared to what we're about to do. Okay? Alright, so now we're going to get into the consciousness stuff and all kinds of different theories that are kind of going around with some of these new studies. Okay? So, the sense of being stared at, alright, so this is done, this has been done since the late 80s, alright? And the research is pretty telling. They've done it over 10,000 times now. And the group, so the sense of being stared at is when you're being stared at, people say that they feel they are being stared at, right? A lot of people say they can feel that, right? So they've done this study where they'll have somebody just sit in a chair and then another person will be looking at them through like a glass mirror or whatever from behind them, and the person's supposed to say when they're being looked at and when they're not being looked at. And so the control group is not being looked at all, right? So they are right at 50, for over 10,000 times the study's been done, they're right at 50.8%, okay? The group that's being stared at, done over 10,000 times, now is at 58.5%. They were correct 58.5%, okay? And so it's pretty unbelievable how much different that is, right? If it's been done 10,000 times, okay? And if say it's 5,000, 5,000, and 5,000 is right at the 50% mark like it should be, and the other 5,000, it's almost closer to 60, they're able to tell when they're being stared at, okay? What was also interesting is the researchers have gone through in some of these different studies, because there are many different studies, and they picked out people who were exceptionally high. And they found certain people are able to get it right 70 to 90% of the time. So some people have extra perception of this somehow. So again, somehow there's some type of transmission of thought in our reality that is affecting now not only your own cells, but the people around you, okay? Okay, the pH of water, all right? So pH of water is a very interesting one. You can look this one up on YouTube. They have a whole video about it. It's done by oh no, this isn't. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. There is another one about water that I'll mention that you can look up on YouTube. That's really good. And normally I play it, and we might play it at the end of this if we have enough time. Okay. So the pH of water. William Tiller from Stanford. Okay, he's from the Department of Material Sciences. He uses these things called intention-imprinted electronic devices. Okay, so he started looking at all this research about how your mind can change things in reality, and he began to worry that if this is a possibility, then every time you do a hypothesis in research, you're now affecting the research, right? Because you're starting to think about it, you can be actually changing the whole research, right? So he has these intention-imprinted electronic devices made, all right? They're a standard electrical circuit, so they give off some type of electrical frequency, like the brain does, and obviously not as complex as that, and they have a basic software component in them, right? So it's designed so that it'll go through the same loop every single time. Okay, so he never sees these, all right, and he takes these and he puts them in a lab that are across the country, and he tells the researchers that they need to get people to go in the room, and they need to go in the room and stare at that electrically imprinted device to just think about either +1, +2, increasing or decreasing, right? And they just sit there and they think about it for, I don't know, whatever, an hour, 2 hours, whatever. Then they take the device, they take it to another spot, they put it with 7.0 pH water, right? That's absolutely, that's right at the baseline of water, right? And they sit it in there and they put it in a box, and these researchers don't know anything about what is supposed to be done, right? They just put it in there, blah, 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 and then they go. And they found that after these electrically imprinted devices will actually change the pH of that water, either up or down, depending on whoever thought that they put their thoughts in that device. So now you're actually able to change electrical, mechanical things, not just other humans. So you're changing reality by thinking about something, some number, right? And this was done by the University of Stanford Department of Material Sciences. Okay, so this is something that is a very, very, very credible type of research. All right, and so it's a very new study, and they're trying to figure out, how could this possibly be? And they've done it against controls where they put the electronically imprinted device that has never been used, and it doesn't change the pH of the water, right? So not only are you able to change your own reality, you change people's reality, you're changing the physical reality around you that aren't even people, but you're also able to do it, and you're able to take it, and they had one study, this same guy, where he let it sit for 3 months, and then he put it in with the water, and it still changed the water. Not at a high enough rate, but it still changed the water. So you're imprinting the power of your thoughts on things all the time, and it lasts. It's powerful. Right? So, just, whew. And he wrote at the end of his study that the chance of this happening in physical reality is 1,000,000 to 1. So I guess it's possible, but okay. So next one, 9/11 consciousness shift. Okay, so this is a very interesting one. So these were researchers at it was either, I think it was Yale. It was Yale. Nope, it was Princeton. Sorry, I do have it in here. So I knew it was an Ivy League one. So it's the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. Okay. So in the 1990s, there are these random number generators, right? They generate either a 1 or a 0 50% of the time. It's completely random, right? So, I mean, obviously, if you set it down for 3 minutes, it might generate a few more ones than zeros. It's kind of supposed to simulate flipping a coin, okay? And so they had initially begun to see this was like when there were really bad natural disasters, it would throw off the percentage of these random number generators, right? So the Princeton Anomalies Lab took these number generators and put them at 62 different places all around the world, okay? And at first they were just going to do it for natural disasters. But then Princess Diana died. And there was a huge shift in all these numbers, and they weren't random anymore, right? And so then they were kind of blown away by that. Then 9/11 happened, and there was an even larger shift. Okay? So now there's a global pattern of people thinking in the same way and changing an electrical device. Okay? So we're all whatever. So you know we all see a plane go into the buildings, and we all immediately have very similar thoughts, right? We're saddened by that. We hate to see something. So now a global mindset of people are all thinking in the same way, and they're able to change reality, right? And so they've now done this for almost 30 years, okay? And so they have, I'm going to go here, we're going to come back, okay? So they have over 500 events that they've seen, all right? And so this would be chance expectation. It should be 50, it should be, 50%, right? So even if it was within standard significant possibilities, it would be right here in this blue line, okay? This is where we're at after 500 different events that they've now categorized. They've not all been negative. Some of them were global meditation days. Some of them were the hijab, for Islam's going to Mecca. Christmas, on Christmas Day, the pattern changes, right? So when you feel Christmas spirit, that's not a saying. That's a literal thing that is consciously changing all of us. Okay? So what I would like to see is if we know that there are specific days, right, that are different, and right, we probably would all agree that Christmas is probably one of the ones that is more positive. I'd like to see on that day, like health statistics and things like that, right? Just interesting, like now that we know that there is some type of field that we're all connected to and we're all affecting, how is it affecting other things that we can measure? Okay? Okay, back. All right. So yeah, that one's crazy. There's a lot of research to read into. You can read into specific events and their power on the earth and things like that. But still, again, kind of mind blowing. Glowing plants. Okay, glowing plants is another interesting study done by Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona. He's the head of the Center for Advances in Consciousness and Health. And so what he did is, this was an online one, all right? And he there are biophotons in all living things, which are kind of like little light-producing, what's the word I'm looking for? Not chemicals, but atomic structures. And you can measure the biophotons of anything to see how much light it's going to give off, right? So he would take 2 leaves, and he would measure the biophotons of them beforehand, okay? And then he would put them on a different thing. He didn't even know, and there would be a random picking. The computer would randomly pick one of those leaves to be shown to people online, and people online would stare at it for 5 minutes, and they were told that they were supposed to see it with light. That was all that they were supposed to put light into it, right? And so they did this with over 10,000 people. They measured the 2 leaves. The other one was the same biophotons, and the one that they were supposed to see light had more biophotons in it, right? And there was even more. Then they did this with they took people and they had them do an hour-long meditation class. They taught them, the strength of your mind and silencing your thoughts, and then they had them look at it, and it was even more powerful.
What do you call it when you set your clock to get up at a certain time in the morning, and 9 times out of 10, I wake up just before it goes off?
Yeah, I
What is that
mean,
called?
Habit.
yeah, habit, circadian rhythm, yeah. I mean, but I do too. I did that this morning. I woke up 7 minutes before mine, but yeah. So, but yeah, it's I mean,
Unreal.
it's just crazy. So, and this was done, it was 7,000 people from 30 different countries. So it wasn't the same people, right? It was all over the world could get a log on and look at this, and that's how it was. And they were told to look at it for 10 minutes. I said 5 minutes. And yeah, they were told to tell it to grow, is what they were told. Or tell it to glow, not grow. Gosh. All right, so dogs who know when their owners are coming home. Okay, so this is an interesting one. All right, this was research done on some owners said that they had a very special connection with their dog, and that people had noticed like that the dog would be near the door more often, all right? And so they did this research and found that during the times that the person was not home, or was not coming home even, the dog was by the door 4% of the time, and then when the person was in its returning phase, the dog was there 61% of the time. Okay? And so they accounted for routine. They had them do different routines, so they came home at different times. They took different cars. They did all kinds of things like that. They accounted for familiar vehicles, having them take the train, having them walk, having them do all kinds of things. Accounted for picking up clues from people at home who might know that they're coming home. So they took people out of there and just recorded it. Okay? And they accounted for, they changed the time, so they accounted for, oh, well, they've just been gone longer, so I'm just going to wait there, right? So they accounted for all those things, took out all those things, and 61% of the time the dog would come to the door during the return phase, whereas it was 4% of the time while the person was gone. So the dog was knowing when the person's intention to return was, right? So again, your thoughts are, okay, I'm headed home, bam, somehow the dog knows, okay? So this tells us that not only do we have all this power, obviously animals have this power, and there may be a way to hone in on this sense, because they may have this sense a little bit stronger, right? So there may be, I mean, we're animals too, so we may be able to hone in on this sense, especially because we haven't been ever told that we have any of these senses, right, or any of these abilities with our brains, so we've always been, everything is, you know, this is how it is, physical reality, la da 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 da, and so we don't think that we have this ability. So one other interesting thing to note about the dog is that when people were home, it was actually 87% of the time that the dog was near the door, and compared to 41% of the time when people weren't home. So it almost seemed like when people were there, the dog was trying to tell those people that, hey, she's on her way home. So just kind of interesting, like trying to communicate the intention there.
We had a cat like that.
Yeah.
You were gone all weekend.
Yeah, you always think like, oh, there's something odd about that, but they know, you know, and studies are showing it. Okay, so the chicks and rats. Okay, so this is the one that kind of blows me away. So I mentioned this one, I think, to one day when the piano guy wasn't here, if you were here. But anyway, so they started with rats, and they started teaching. In New York City, they started teaching these rats how to get through a maze, right? And they had the same maze, and so the rats would learn progressively, and they would, obviously their time would go down. They'd get through the maze quicker, right? Because it was the same maze. Okay. So then what they saw was they would do that trial there. Then they did a trial in London, and the beginning, the rat's time in London was quicker in the beginning, even though he had no communication with the rat in New York, okay? And then it would learn, and then they did it in a different city, and they did one in Australia. And every time they would do a successive, they did the same map, every time they would do it, or not map, but track for it to go through, the beginning rat would be able to do the maze better than the previous rat was able to do. So somehow, again, transmission of information across spans by thoughts of the rat. Okay, so they took same researchers, okay, that did the rats, took these chicks. Okay, these were chicks that were just 1 day old. Okay, and they had two groups. They had one group that was supposed to peck at these purple balls, right, whatever the colors were, and then one group that was supposed to you put balls out and the chicks automatically peck at them. They're just like inquisitive, right? So one that had yellow balls, one that had purple balls. Okay, the yellow balls had like a slight chemical on it that made them sick. Okay, they didn't die or anything like that. Whatever, right? Okay, and so then they took those. They're just 1 day old. They took them out. Then they got a new set of 1 day old chicks. Okay, and these were not genetically related in any way. They kept getting from completely different branches from all different around the world. Okay, they did this for 365 days in a row. Okay, they did this for an entire year. 1 day old chicks every day. What they found was, after 365 days, now 365 different chicks, the ones that were getting the yellow balls, were now taking longer to go peck at the yellow balls. And they're brand new baby chicks that weren't related to any of those other chicks. So they're born with inherent thoughts from the group, from the collective group. So not only are your thoughts powerful enough to transmit to generations down the line that you're related to, but to all the generations down the line, right? What the weirdest part was, okay, not only was this group pecking at them less often, the group that knew that it wasn't going to make them sick was pecking at them quicker. Both groups, they both changed.
Who would have thought a chick had a brain?
Right?
Yeah.
Even to
Just
think
saying,
that.
I mean, it had a brain, but thoughts,
Yeah.
you know, like that.
Yeah. So, and again, if you want to see the research, you can see it. It's awesome. The results are beyond statistical significance, okay, which is a term used in research, and it's unbelievable what the implications of it are down the line, right? So, the biggest thing to take away is that every single thought that you have is changing so much of reality. It's not even just changing your current reality, it's changing the future of all people's reality and how connected we are, right? So that's the main thing that we should take away from today, okay? That this is something that we're now studying, and research has proven that this is how powerful our minds are, okay? Beyond just the miracles that we hear about where people think of themselves of not having cancer and then they don't have cancer, because that happens. I've also seen many cases of people who are paralyzed, told they were never going to walk again, and 10 years later they're running a marathon.
And you can get a phone call, and you were just ready to call that person.
Yes.
Yeah, oh yeah,
That
that
shakes
one.
me up.
That would be an interesting setting because I mean everybody's had that.
Yeah.
So I would like to see my brother is a quantum physicist, right? And so he always talks about this in relation to stats. Like he's like, well, if you could show me the statistical amount of times that you actually think about that person on a daily basis, like and then add up, you know, how you would correlate that, then we'd be able to tell that, right? So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. We are complete with that. If you want to, I'm going to pull up another water experiment on YouTube really quickly, and it's about a 5-minute one, and it's really, again, very awesome. And I think that we may even try one of these. So there are 2 experiments that they do, and one of them there's bunches of people who do this on. It's kind of was like a fad on YouTube to take rice, all right, and you would put on rice. I hate you, I love you, and then you would put one of the rice and you just wouldn't look at it, right? Okay, so you put them all 3 in the same closet, and it's cooked rice, okay? And each day you take them out separately and you sit and you look at I hate you and you say it for 5 minutes straight, okay? And then you put it back, and then you do the same thing with I love you, and then you don't touch the other one, okay? And then after 2 months, you can get them out. The I hate you is black, completely black. The I love you has no mold on it. Okay, and these are anybody here can go on YouTube and find over 50 videos of people who've done this, because there's a lot of people who have done this just on their own. Okay.
How many people were in the study?
This is not a study. This is just a home thing that people do.
Oh,
Okay.
so it's an
And so
individual.
I'm gonna plan for us to try this because it'll be fun, I think, for us to do it. And we'll have people come each day and they'll read them and we'll see how it affects it, right? And then the middle one that didn't look at was kind of in between the 2, right?
Yeah, there's a study too about praying.
Yeah, that's the one I'm gonna pull up right now.
And, okay.
The
'cause
crystal, the
no,
water.
That was one, but this one is praying on petri dishes for growth. And the ones that were prayed over actually grew more things than the other one who wasn't prayed over.
Yeah.
And there was a lot being written about that about 15 years ago. And probably a lot of people know about it. I don't know. Yeah.
Epigenetics, you have to try Money.com. Money.com is a platform to track everything that's goes on. We use it for all our projects.
Okay, so it's 3 minutes.
Oh, yeah, I've got his book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. This is real woo-woo.